So sorry, my name is Victoria Moffat, and I run LexRex Communications, which is a PR and marketing consultancy for the legal sector. In terms of my background, before I set up my agency and kind of got myself trained up in PR, I was a practicing solicitor. So I have experience on kind of both sides, as it were. So our webinar today is all about media relations, and basically how to do it and how to get the most out of it and how to kind of really use it to promote yourself and your team and/or your firm. The session usually takes around 40 to 45 minutes, but if lots of people have lots of questions, which I hope they do, it may last the full hour. If you do have any questions, then stick them in the Q&A in the chat, and if you see me looking over this side, it's because I'm kind of dual screening and I'll be looking there periodically for any questions that may pop up. Excellent. Right, so now we're here, let's get cracking. Oh, that's me. Yeah, so first of all, I want to talk to you about the LexRex formula. And the LexRex formula is basically what we do every time we start working with a new client. And essentially, it's the process that we go through in order to build a strategy that we then kind of deliver against. And obviously media relations forms a really big part of the vast majority of our strategies. And I just think actually it's really helpful to share sort of our methodology, how we do things, so that you can get a greater understanding of where PR and media relations should fit into your kind of broader marketing strategy, but also so you can see how the experts do it, I suppose. Perfect. So this basically is our formula. We start off every time with working out what the client's goal is, and or what their goals are. Now, obviously, depending on who you're doing this planning for, will depend on what your goals look like. So, for example, the individual personal goals of a fee earner or a partner will look very different to that of his or her team, which in turn will probably look quite different to the whole firm's goals, but hopefully they're kind of similar enough that they tie in together, and they sort of dovetail. So in terms of goals, we always say that goals need to be SMART goals, so the usual rules need to be measurable, time bound, achievable, and all the rest of it. And your goal really is kind of your very top level. Very top level kind of planning. So, really zooming out and saying, right, what am I trying to achieve? What's my team trying to achieve? What's the firm trying to achieve? And once you kind of understand that, it just makes all of the rest of the process sort of a lot easier, because you know that ultimately everything that you do has to point towards this set of this individual goal that is itself measurable. So once you kind of have your goal, your next thing that you need to think about is your strategy. And your strategy is basically how you are, broadly speaking, going to achieve your goal. Your strategy at this point doesn't cover tactics, so we're not interested in kind of talking about social media. We're not talking about, we're going to do this on Twitter or that on Facebook, and we're going to do this newsletter. It's not that granular. It's much sort of higher level than that. So once you have your goal, once you have your strategy, the next thing that you really need to be thinking about is your target audiences. Now, target audiences are basically the people that you want to be talking to. So, for example, the most regular, most common kind of goals and strategy related matters that we see relate to sales, relate to new business, that side of things. So, taken simply, if you are trying to increase your sales by 20% over the next 18 months. And I say sales, and I know that some lawyers go, we don't sell. You do. You do sell, and you need to be thinking about who you are selling to, or who you are servicing, or who is instructing you, or however you want to term it, however you want to talk about that. So target audiences, what do I mean when I talk about target audiences, and how do we develop them? So essentially, we would tend to suggest, between 1 and 3 target audiences is appropriate. And these can be people that you want to sell directly to. So people who you want to be your clients or to become your clients, or existing clients that you want to sell more to or sell different stuff to, for example. Your target audiences can be the people that you want to refer work to you. So they're not kind of direct clients, but they're still really, really important for the work that you do. And target audiences can sometimes be almost kind of influencers in your particular field, you know, the kind of movers and shakers, the people who know everybody, who again can generate those referrals, but perhaps don't necessarily generate the referrals, but will talk about you, will you know, it's good for you to be seen in the same sorts of places as those sorts of people. So in terms of actually creating these target audiences, one thing that you can do that's really helpful is to create personas. And the idea of a persona is that you literally sort of build almost a picture of the particular person within your target audience. So how do you do this? Well, lots of different ways to do it, and there's no kind of hard or set way of doing this. But for example, if you know that 50% of your sort of most profitable instructions last year came from a particular demographic or a particular type of person, or a particular type of person within a particular geography or a particular sector, or anything like that, you can start to pull out that data, and that can be data that you hold kind of in your CMS. Sort of, it may be in your brain, maybe you just know this. Maybe your marketing department will have this information, or maybe it's just a gut feeling that actually, you know, you do a little bit of this work at the minute, but it's a growing market, and you can get more of this work and it will be very profitable. So it's looking at the various sort of data sources that you have, along with potentially a bit of gut feeling, a bit of understanding of the market that you work in, and pull as much information as you can together to basically create sort of almost on paper a set of characteristics that this particular target audience has. You know, you can go as far as sort of naming them. You can talk about how they look, you can talk about their education levels, geography, what their family setup is, even as far as, you know, what kind of car they drive. You know, if you can really work out and really hone in on what this persona looks like, how they act, it really then helps to make your marketing more efficient sort of further down the line. That's target audiences, and that's quite a top level view of that. If anybody has any questions specifically on target audiences, do let me know and we can answer them. But if not, let's move on to key messages. Now, what are key messages? So again, key messages are really important. And once you understand who your target audiences are, you can start to think, okay, well, these are the key messages that I want those target audiences to associate with my particular brand, or the brand of the team, or the brand of the firm. That will sort of encourage them to do what you want them to do. So we'll encourage them to buy from you, we'll encourage them to re-instruct you on a different matter, we'll encourage them to buy different types of services from you than what they've bought before, we'll encourage them to refer people to you, and we'll encourage you to come and ask you to speak at a local conference or on a panel, or etc. So again, the key messages are just thinking, okay, what do I want this person to be thinking about when they think about my brand? And also, what do I want to be saying? So, you know, it's not difficult. It just takes a bit of sitting down and a bit of working out, essentially. So key messages, in terms of how many key messages, probably between 1 to 3 per set of target audiences, and/or up to 3 overall. You know, if you're ending up and/or up to kind of maybe 5 overall. What you don't want to do is end up in a situation where you've got like 20 key messages, because with the best will in the world, nobody can remember 20 key messages. You can't remember 20 key messages internally, but more importantly, when you're putting your marketing activity out there, when you're doing your PR, when you're doing your media relations, 20 different key messages just aren't going to get that cut through. So absolute maximum of 5, 3 is ideal. Okay. And again, you don't need to publicize these key messages. These are sort of things that you have internally that you then use to guide the content that you put out there, the publications that you go after, and the press releases that you draft, that sort of thing. It's very much internally for you to be thinking, this is what we want people to think. You don't necessarily go, oh, hi, target audience 1, this is my key message. It's not, it's internal. Okay. Once you know your goal, your strategy, your target audiences, and your key messages, the next thing to be thinking about is tactics, and what tactics you're going to actually use to help you to achieve the goal. One thing we see so often, unfortunately, is people get really excited by like a brand new shiny tactic. So the brand new shiny tactic might be There's a piece of tech, for example, called Certify, which you can use, which I'm sure some of you will have heard of. I don't have an issue with Certify, by the way. I know quite a lot of firms that use it. It seems very effective. And Certify actually enables you to almost sort of semi-automate the first appointment that you have with the client. So the client kind of clicks on the website, sets up the appointment, and then Certify asks them to fill all the details in, so that when they have that first contact, the lawyer already knows exactly what's going on and has the information to hand. If you find that actually you are giving lots of free hour appointments away, for example, and it's taking you far too long to get to the information that you need from the client, and Certify could do a better job for you, you should use Certify. However, what I don't think you should do is go, oh, Certify, shiny, 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 let's use it. And the same goes for, TikTok. So, for example, I've seen a few firms get really excited about TikTok and Instagram. These are absolutely fantastic platforms. However, you don't want to come at this, you don't want to come at this side of things, tactics first. You don't want to be saying, oh, TikTok, how can we retrofit that into our strategy? What you need to do is following the steps here, or whatever steps that you prefer to follow internally, to make sure that you're thinking about strategy and goal first and not tactics first. And the problem with going tactics first is, there's always something new, there's always something shiny, there's always something that you can use to distract you. There's always other firms using different ways of doing things, and it's just really easy to get into this mindset of thinking you have to be everywhere, first of all, but then also thinking, well, they're doing it, so we need to do it. Whereas actually, no, stop, think about who you're aiming for, think about what you're trying to achieve, and then think, okay, what's the tech that I can use? What are the channels that I can use? What are the old-fashioned kind of marketing tactics that are readily available and cheap that I can use to deliver against what we're trying to do? That's all I'm warning you against there. So in terms of your tactics, it's things like social media, media relations, broader marketing, events, awards, legal directories, what else? Webinars like this. It's all that sort of stuff. Okay. Budget. What do I mean by budget? Budget's really important to think about, actually, and I don't necessarily just mean a cash budget, a financial budget. I also mean a time budget. And the reason it's so important to think about a time budget is if, for example, you are a marketing manager or a team leader or a managing director or whatever position you hold in the firm, and you decide, okay, right, we need to get a firm-wide LinkedIn page, absolutely fine, get that, if your target audiences are there. And then you're saying to all of your fee earners and all of your support staff, we're going to be sharing content regularly, and we also expect you guys to share it, on our behalf. Now, if your fee earners, for example, are expected to bill, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 billable hours per day, and you're suddenly saying to them, oh, and we also want you to do this on top, but by the way, we're not going to reduce your billable hours target, we're not going to financially reward you for doing this, we're not going to kind of gamify it or anything, we just want you to do it, then with the best will in the world, why on earth are those fee owners going to do it? Why are they going to do it if they don't achieve anything out of it, and if it actually then squeezes their billable time, then why would they do it? And that's why it's really important to think of time in respect of budgets as well as actual physical cash. Now, obviously, physical cash can be easier to measure in some ways, but I'm assuming if you're already time recording, then actually, you can think about, okay, how do we make the time for fee earners to be able to do this stuff? And also worth thinking about in terms of budget as well, both physical and time budget, is training. So if you are asking people to do this, how are you going to help them? How are you going to support them so that they understand how to do this stuff, what's expected from them, and how to physically do it? So again, just really worthwhile just thinking about those sides of things. Measurement is so important, and again, it's kind of cyclical, isn't it? If you've got these SMART goals at the top, then you want to know when you've achieved them, by the deadline that you set yourself. Well, how on earth can you do that if you've not put in place a measurement metrics? So what does measurement look like? The measurement is one of those things that there are so many different ways of measuring it that ultimately it's going to come down to what your goals are. What are you trying to achieve, and then working backwards and saying, okay, well, what data can I get my hands on how can I use that data to support what I think is happening or what I want to be happening, and how will I know when I've hit my goal? How will I know when I've been successful? And again, we often see people actually sort of almost going, oh no, I'm not going to measure it, I'll just kind of know. Well, no, how can you possibly just know? And again, actually, it ties in with this idea that I'm sure you all have heard of, which is that something like 50% of your marketing budget is effectively spent, and the problem is working out which 50% is effective. And flippancy aside, measurement will help you to do that. It's just, you just need to sit down and work out what you're going to measure and why. Okay, so that's kind of our broad approach to kind of the strategy that we follow, the approach, sorry, that we follow, and hopefully that's been helpful, and hopefully it will be helpful as we now sort of proceed on to the nitty-gritty of media relations and how you can use media relations to support your goals. I'm just checking to see if there are any questions. No questions yet, but again, do feel free if you have any. So identifying your target audiences, again, we've kind of covered this in a bit of detail already, but if I didn't say it in enough detail before, it's really about sitting down and understanding in real depth what these people look like. So, what they, not necessarily what they physically look like, but where do they hang out? And in terms of media relations, one of the reasons it's really, really, really important to get this right as far as you can is the media is so huge, and you could spend all of your time doing media relations, and I mean it would be a wonderful thing to do, because media relations is great, and who couldn't love it, but actually you need to know where your target audiences are hanging out, where they're consuming information. So if you are dealing with or if you want to target company directors, then often, not always, often these are going to be people who may have university education behind them. They may be 40 plus. They may be male. They may live in particularly nice areas, near to where your firm is. They may drive a marked car. They may drive a BMW, an Audi. They may drive a Jaguar, that sort of type of car. They may read the Times. They may read the Telegraph. They may view the BBC. They may listen to 5 Live. I don't know. You will know better than me. What I'm trying to say here is, already you can see that by understanding what those people look like, having that sort of persona idea in mind, you're already starting to think, okay, where are these people hanging out? What sort of information do these people consume? Are they on Facebook? I don't know. They could be on Facebook because the demographic for Facebook is getting older. So a 40-year-old man, 40-plus-year-old man, yeah, he probably is on Facebook. However, does he want to be hearing about your law firm on Facebook? Possibly not. Possibly he does. I don't know. Again, you need to test that. So you can see that we're starting to work through the sort of different tactics with reference to the target audience, and it's just really important to do that. And actually, it's really empowering, because once you start to think like this person, once you start to understand this person in a lot of detail, as well as knowing where they are going to be, you start to understand where they're not going to be. And so again, are they going to be on Instagram? They might be. So how can you work out? Well, you can go and have a look on Instagram yourself and see, whether any of your clients are on there, basically, or whether the people who are on Instagram are like your clients, whether they're alike in terms of the persona. And knowing where these people aren't is just as important, actually, as knowing where they are, because then you can make sure that you're putting your marketing efforts, your marketing budget, both in time and both in money, to very, very much focusing on where they are, just sacking off completely where they aren't. And actually, just on that point, it's worthwhile noting as well, we often see lots of firms thinking they have to be everywhere. We have to be on TikTok, we have to be on Instagram, we have to be on Facebook, we have to be on Twitter, we have to be on LinkedIn, we have to be here, we have to do this, we have to do everything. And actually, no, you don't. You don't have to do that at all, and you shouldn't do that, because nobody has the time to effectively manage sort of 6 channels really, really well. Because if you're dealing with Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, that's 4 different channels. But more importantly, that's 4 different types of channels. It's 4 different types of content that you're going to have to create and curate and put up and manage and deal with. And actually, the social. I mean, I know we're talking about media relations shortly, but taking that social media example as an example, each of those social media networks are slightly different in terms of their nuance, in terms of the sort of content that engages people. So it's not just a matter of creating one asset and then flinging it out there. To do it properly, you literally need to be thinking, you know, yes, that's right for that channel, but it's wrong for that channel. And that's very time consuming, and rightly so, because if you're going to do it right, but just stop and think about the investment that's going to cost you if indeed you think that you should be on, say, 4 channels. Okay. So I think that's everything I still want to cover on target audiences, but hopefully you can understand why I think it's so important to get that step right, and also to keep it under evaluation. You know, look at your target audiences, review your target audiences, you know, at least once a year. You know, particularly if, for example, you're in an area of law that's quite fast moving. So employment law is always a good one. You know, it may be that your target audience simply doesn't change from year to year, or it may be, you know, that there's a really big change in the law. Like, for example, when employment tribunals started charging fees, you know, that was huge. That was huge for employment lawyers. So just keep them under review and be willing to change them if they're not working for you anymore. Okay. Defining your key messages, again, we've talked about this, and I don't think I've got a huge amount more to add to that particular section. So let's move on to identifying your target publications. Okay, so this basically comes down to what we've just been talking about in terms of making sure that you are where your audiences are hanging out. And one thing that's really important to just quickly talk about in terms of target publications is particularly with kind of written and online media, so kind of the newspapers and other sort of publications that aren't broadcast and aren't radio. When you sit down and think about where you want to be appearing in the media, and let's take, you know, the written press and the online press as an example, it's worthwhile knowing that there are different segments of press, there are different types of press. So you've got obviously the broadsheets, for example, so that's the Times, the Telegraph, etc., etc. And that's one element of the media. Then you have the kind of more tabloid sort of press. So, you know, you're looking at the kind of the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Sun, that sort of press. Then you have trade press. So trade press is, as the name suggests, so the legal press is one example of trade press. So, you know, the Law Society, The Lawyer, Global Legal Post, Legal Futures, Legal Practice Management, Briefing Magazine, all of those are trade press within legal, hence legal press. And you find that most, if not all, sectors will have their own publications. So, for example, accountancy press, or agricultural press, or HR press, or and you know, often they'll be split across vertical and horizontal lines. So, for example, sector versus HR, for example. And one of the very first things that you need to do once you've identified your key messages and your target audiences is understand which media is right for you, which press you want to be in. Now, everybody wants to be in, you know, the Times, the Telegraph, etc., because the reach is so powerful, and also that kind of that brand power, that associated brand power of being in one of those sort of top names is really powerful, and you can really help yourself by you know, sharing those wins on social media, and like I say, that association with those brands is really, really powerful. However, is that going to bring on more business directly? It may do. It may do. You know, if you are repeatedly in the Telegraph, for example, talking about a class action, to the extent that you become associated with that type of class action, then there's a very real chance that that is going to deliver work for you. So, for example, Baroness Shackleton famously had a glass of water thrown over her, didn't she, by Mrs. Mills McCartney, the very charming Mrs. Mills McCartney back in the day. Now, obviously, she has done exceptionally well off that sort of slightly unfortunate event, to the extent that she is now known as one of the UK's leading divorce lawyers. She was already by the time that it happened, but she certainly wasn't in, you know, for the vast majority of us, she wasn't in our public eye. She didn't mean anything to us. And you know, say the same for Aisha Badag, you know, so she dealt with the Radmacher case, I think about, I don't even know how long ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And, you know, so now as a result of all the media coverage around that, and actually, you know, yes, she very skillfully was able to turn that to her advantage. And I don't criticise her for that. I think you should do that if you have the opportunity of getting that national and international coverage. So for those individuals, that sort of ongoing coverage, that ongoing sort of association with those two particular incidents and matters, has meant that they have been able to drive work through those top end publications. For many of us, though, we simply don't have those high profile clients, and it may be we just don't have the opportunity to be speaking to the Telegraph every week, every month, or even every year. And being completely honest, those pieces of coverage can be a real career high that we do only see a few times, and we can't all have those really publicity-worthy clients, publicity-worthy matters. So what can the rest of us do, to make sure that we're getting into the publications that we want to be into? So trade press is really, really, really powerful. The audiences may not be huge, but the benefit for you guys with trade press is that it's an engaged audience. It's an audience that we know wants to know about what you've got to talk about. So, they want to hear about the latest changes in the law. They want to hear about your anecdotes and your advice. Really, really powerful. Definitely, understand trade press for your particular specialism. Go and research it. Go and find out, who is writing about your stuff, and get them on your list. Okay. And just in terms of other types of publications, there's literally no end. So you've got kind of lifestyle, glossies, fashion. Another really powerful area to look as well is at your regional business press. So the vast majority of the UK will have some sort of local coverage, local publication, local little kind of like A5 sort of newsletter that goes through the post box every month or every quarter, say. And again, these are really, really powerful places to be seen because it's a local audience. And yes, obviously the internet has changed things so that people do want to instruct solicitors online more than they used to. But actually, a lot of the time, people still want to engage a local solicitor who understands the local area, who understands the challenges of the local area, who knows local people. And I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's like a comfort thing. But what it means is, and I'm sure this is still the case, for the vast majority of kind of the regional firms, the high street firms, the small boutiques, most of your clients are local to you, aren't they? Let's be honest. So don't ignore them. Don't ignore these regional publications. Make sure you know what they are. Make sure you know who the journalists are, and if you can and if you feel able to, build those relationships. And I will come on to how to do that in due course in terms of those relationships. Okay, so identifying your target publications, literally it can just be a spreadsheet. It can be a spreadsheet of, right, these are the target publications that we want to be getting in front of. Okay, so what makes a great story? We have a very cheesy phrase that we use when we talk about what makes a great story, and we call them the 8 engaging elements. Okay, and we can laugh and have a bit of a joke about it, but actually, the 8 engaging elements are really, really, really important because individually or collectively, the 8 engaging elements are what help to make a good story. What helped to what helped to create this buzz or a feeling or a movement. So I'll quickly talk you through what they are. And actually, the phrase that's on screen now, what should I share and why should anybody care? We've taken this directly actually from our social media webinar that we also run very similarly to this one. And the point really is, why should anybody care? Why should anybody care, what you've got to say? Most of the time we're not interested in what other people say. We're only interested in our own opinions, aren't we? These 8 engaging elements will help you to create a narrative that people will be interested in and that people will care about. And I'm going to talk you through the elements now. Immediacy. So what do we mean by immediacy? So it's literally, has this just happened? Now, you'll see it yourself if you follow kind of the news alerts on Twitter, or if you have the kind of the BBC news alert on your iPad or on your phone, that breaking news makes everyone just be like, oh my god, what's happened? And people love breaking news. People love to feel like they're the first to know something or the first to share something. So that immediacy is quite important, jumping on top of what's going on. Proximity. So by proximity, we're talking about is it something that's close to you? Now it can be something that's geographically close to you. So again, talking about the regional publications. People love to hear about what's happening in the local village. If somebody's running a marathon for a local charity, or if the library is running a Lego day, or if one of the local schools has been working in partnership with a local business to raise money for the PTA. People love this sort of really hyper local stuff because it affects us. It's our community, it's where we live, it's where we want to be. It's important. It doesn't have to just be geographically proximate. We can also be talking about something that's close to somebody's heart. So a story that matters to people, quite an emotional story. It's also worth thinking about. Prominence is a really good one. So this is it significant to people? So relatively recently, we have seen, in fact, I was going to talk about Prince Philip dying, but I've actually got a better example. Prominence. So I've seen on The Guardian this morning, there's a story, people are being asked not to panic buy their children's Christmas presents. So of course, everybody's going to panic buy their children's Christmas presents now, aren't they? Because they've been told not to, in the same way that we were told, 2 weeks ago, not to panic about the fuel situation and not to panic buy fuel, because there is plenty of fuel. It's just that nobody seems to be able to deliver it anywhere. It's that same thing. It matters. People care about this stuff. People care that when their kids get up on Christmas morning that they're going to be able to get the toy that they want. People care that when they need to get to work that they've got fuel and they're not going to have to go and queue at midnight somewhere to get fuel. Does it matter to people? People care about this stuff. Oddity. What do I mean by oddity? Okay, this is your weird stuff. This is like your dancing Yoda. This is like your gigantic snake eating a zebra. People like weird stuff. Now, what I would say in terms of you guys as lawyers and representing law firms, you don't necessarily want to associate yourselves with oddity for hopefully obvious reasons. It's fine to be unusual. It's fine to be quirky. It's fine to sort of own any differences that you have. What I think you need to be careful about is sort of straying into weirdness. You don't want to be in weirdness territory, okay? Conflict is the next one. So actual conflict, the awful stories that were coming out of Afghanistan over the summer. People were gripped because it was just so hideous and horrifying, and such a terrible end to kind of 20 years of the UK being involved in this awful situation that kind of rose out of 9/11. People, rightly or wrongly, you're almost drawn to it, aren't you? You're drawn to conflict. In terms of law firms talking about conflict, no, possibly. I can't see an immediate link, but again, perhaps there is. Perhaps if you're a human rights specialist, for example, you'd be talking about the situation on the ground in Afghanistan, and actually, a really good take on that. Immigration lawyers, for example, would be interested in talking about people who have been able to come to the UK and perhaps lobbying their MP, lobbying the government to think about how to make it possible for more people to come, if that's something that's close to their heart, for example. Conflict isn't just about wars, though. For example, it's almost celebrity conflict. It's divorces, high-profile divorces. The Sun are always all over that, aren't they? And actually, we've seen in the Times and the Telegraph relatively recently quite a few stories around quite high-profile, high-value divorces. And again, there's always appetite for that, not just for divorces, but any kind of conflict. So maybe if you've got a CEO who's been sacked, or that would be a great one for employment lawyers, or maybe like the Grenfell tragedy, for example. This idea that who's going to pay for all this cladding needs replacing on kind of thousands of buildings across the UK. Again, a fascinating topic with conflict that's sort of grown out of this this terrible, awful incident of a few years ago, this tragedy, the Grenfell tragedy. Hopefully you can start to see that all of the major news stories that we see have some or all of these elements. Suspense, who doesn't like suspense? When you get the at the end of EastEnders, it's always suspenseful. And you think, God, EastEnders has been on the telly for like 30 years or whatever. How on earth can they come up with like 5 days every week of enough suspenseful endings? But they seem to do it, don't they? So again, for us, I think we think about dispensing, you know, how can we leave the reader wanting more? You know, how can we make them come back for a bit more? How can we pique that interest? How can we get them to pick up the phone? How can we get them to sign up to our newsletter, or whatever it is that we want them to do? If we can do it with a bit of suspense, a bit more likely to kind of get them to take that next step. Okay, and emotion is a really, really, really powerful one, and actually for that reason, I always say you have to be a little bit careful with emotion. So, you know, LinkedIn as an example, you know, you will quite often see on LinkedIn people sharing their lived experiences or something that's happened to them. And recently there's, I'm sure you will all have seen it, I can't remember what the hashtag is, but there's this idea of a woman will share a picture of her as a child and talk about the child in the third person, and then say, you know, and this child is me, and it's all, you know, the idea of it, it's basically you know, to show people, to show other people where they have come from, and you know, the obstacles that they've overcome in their career and their personal lives to get to where they are now. And the idea, I think, is to, well, the idea is definitely to kind of encourage, you know, that younger generation to see women in powerful successful careers and situations. And you know, I get that, I think it's great, but of course with that you get an inevitable backlash of people being like, oh, you know, I don't want to see this sort of content. So yeah, emotion, you do need to be a bit careful with it. And actually, you know, from a media relations specific perspective, again, you need to be careful in the sense of, you know, if you are talking about a sensitive story, like for example Grenfell, or you know, any sort of situation where emotions run very high, you probably, well, first of all, you should probably get media training so that you know how to handle this side of things. But you need to show empathy. You know, you need to show empathy in those situations. And if you can't show empathy because, for example, say you're on kind of the wrong side, just think about whether you should be talking about it at all, because actually it may damage you reputationally wise. Okay, so just be careful with emotion. Consequence is the last one again, and this is just the idea of does the story have an impact on people's lives? And you know, if there is an impact, you know, what kind of is it? And we see this quite often with lawyers in the press, for example, you know, giving advisory pieces around changes in the law or things that are happening, steps that you need to take to kind of protect yourself. So for example, get a will or XYZ will happen, you know, get a prenup or XYZ will happen, that sort of side of things. So hopefully those 8 engaging elements kind of give you some pause for thought in terms of, you know, the content that you can be putting out there and the work that you can do media relations wise. Okay. So next I want to just talk a little bit about kind of the nitty gritty of how you can generate coverage. So one thing you're going to have to get comfortable with is researching the publications that you want to be in, and most importantly, understanding the journalists who are creating the content and getting friendly with them, basically. So how do you do this? First of all, understand your publication. So, you know, maybe start with kind of 3 publications that you would really like to be featured in. What you need to do is start reading these publications. So, you know, if you want to be in the Times, you need to read the Times every day. You need to start to see who is writing about legal issues, who is quoting lawyers, and then who are they quoting? You know, is it people who are kind of similar to your firm? Are they really different? And what are these law firms saying? You know, and who's being quoted? Is it a partner? Is it a paralegal? Who is it? And what are they saying? And over time, and it is time consuming, over time you'll start to understand, you know, what people are interested in, what people have to say, the sorts of subjects that people are interested in. And hopefully you'll start to see a pattern as well in the style of reporting. So obviously the Telegraph is quite right wing. So if you're quite right wing, you're probably, you know, you may well be a good spokesperson for them. The Guardian, by you know, in comparison, is relatively left wing. So if you feel more comfortable in that, you know, in that space, then, you know, maybe you need to be looking, you know, more at the opportunities that the Guardian could offer you, whilst also remembering, of course, you know, where your clients are, where your target audiences are, who it is that you actually want to get in front of. And so research is super, super important. Once you sort of have gotten to grips with the actual publications themselves, you will understand which journalists are starting to write about which particular elements. So you'll be able to start to create a list of sort of a hit list, basically, of these journalists who have an interest in your particular specialism. So with that, what I would say then is go and look at where these journalists hang out. Most journalists are on Twitter, so get yourself on Twitter and sort of follow them, and again, to look at the stuff that they're sharing, the sort of content that they're sharing. One thing Twitter is really, really powerful for is finding opportunities. And if you understand Twitter at all, you'll know what a hashtag is. And if you don't, go Google it. Try to follow as often as you can the hashtag journo, Jorno request, journo request, all one word. And you'll see that every day, throughout every day, there are lots and lots and lots of different requests from journalists for expert commentary. So it's basically catnip for people who want media coverage. And what you do is basically, if the journo puts out the request, you literally just reply. Well, you either reply and say, look, I can talk about this, and maybe give a bit more detail, or they may give you an email address, which you should then pitch to them, or they may say, please send me a direct message, in which case, do exactly what it is that they ask for, essentially. So you've got your hit list, you've got your sort of list of journalists that you want to get in touch with. What next? Basically, just keep an eye on what's going on in the media agenda. Keep an eye on what's going on with respect to your particular field or your particular area of expertise. And if you see a breaking story and you think, actually, I can talk about this, even if it's not your matter, even if you're not involved in the litigation that's being talked about, it doesn't really matter. You can literally think, okay, well, I've seen that X journalist has covered this before, which is sort of similar to this breaking news story. And then literally you can send them an email and say, look, this is what I can talk about in respect to this matter. Maybe even sending them a link and say, this is just broken or whatever. And just get in touch. One thing I would say is, unfortunately, with the Times Telegraph broadsheets, for example, it's really not uncommon for them not to reply, for them just to ignore you. But know this, if you hit the mark, they will be back to you, and they will say, yes, we definitely want comments on this. If that happens, you will need to turn around those comments quickly. If you ask them for a deadline, they will give you a deadline, and you must do that. You must stick to the deadline. It's time consuming, it's frustrating. It often comes when you are busy with everything else, but unfortunately, the media is so quick that if you don't hit the deadline, they will just simply go somewhere else. And also, they might just sort of blacklist you and say, well, I'm not using them again because they promised me something and they never came up with the goods. Okay. If you do all of that and then you get your, you get your coverage, you get your quote, again, email back, say to them, look, thank you for using my comments. Do you want to go for lunch? Do you want to go for coffee? Can we keep in touch? You can contact me for X, Y, Z matters, and just build those relationships. Become known as that trusted source. And if you can start to do that with a range of different journalists, in the longer term, they will start to come to you. It's time consuming. It takes a long time, but that unfortunately is just the nature of media relations. Different channels and different approaches. Okay, so we've broadly kind of talked about the sort of written publications and the online publications. I just want to really quickly cover off some of the other elements that are involved in media relations. Television and radio. It's quite tricky to get onto television, I'll be honest, and that's because often the journalists want somebody who's polished and who knows what they're doing. Now, one of the ways around this is to get yourself media trained, because we always find that if we pitch somebody to TV or to radio, if we can say this person is media trained and here's a clip of their previous work, again, it just shows that there's that expertise, there's that understanding of how that particular media works, and again, you are more likely to be used. In terms of how you pitch to these publications, to broadcast and radio, they all have their own phone numbers, so you can really easily get hold of like Channel 5, not Channel 5, BBC 5 Live, BBC news desks, go straight to them. There are products that you can buy that will enable you to get sort of slightly more expert contact details. So for example, Roxhill, a product called Roxhill, it's about £2,000, probably more per year, that gives you basically access to every journalist that you could possibly imagine. It's a big investment, but again, if you're a firm that's serious about its media relations, it's definitely worthwhile expense. There are other products as well. I mean, if you just Google kind of media databases, there are a few different ones. And there's another one called Gorkana. For me, Roxill's the best. That's the one we use, but it's not the cheapest, as you would expect. What else to tell you? Yeah, I mean, it's how I've kind of explained it. What we've talked about in terms of approaching the publications. That it is literally as simple as that. We'll just really quickly cover off press releases, actually, because I'm conscious I've not talked about those. So press release is a vehicle for getting your kind of interesting or good news out. If you start to look at your local business press, local business pages, you will see which publications use press releases, because they are usually literally, the story is literally copied and pasted from the press release. So it'll be something like X law firm is delighted to announce the appointment of 3 new partners and a new CEO, and then you'll have a quote from the CEO and then a couple of quotes, maybe one from the new partner and one from an existing partner within the firm, how delighted they are, welcoming them along, help us with our growth, all this sort of stuff. Press releases are really, really powerful if you send them to the right places. So never send a press release, for example, to the BBC, because they just won't use it. However, can you send a press release to your regional business press? Yes, absolutely. As long as you've done your research and as long as it's written, in the same way as the press releases that it's already featuring from other people. Trade press, yeah, absolutely. Press releases can be quite powerful for trade press. Again, as long as you've done your research and you can see that those publications do use those press releases. And if they don't, it's not the route for you. It's not the right way to go about it, because what happens is you annoy the journalist, you waste their time because you're asking them to read something that's not relevant, and you kind of sour those relationships before you've even started them. So yes, press releases definitely have their place. And if you are going to the effort of putting a press release out, for example, for new partners, new staff, then make sure you have really nice photography as well, because again, a picture says 1,000 words, doesn't it? And why spend all the time putting together a lovely press release and then not bother sending a really nice image that the journalist can use in their piece when they use the press release? So that probably just about brings me to the end of this session. I'm not seeing any questions come through at the minute. If anybody does have any questions, or if there's anything you think I've not if there's anything that I've not dealt with that you wanted to know about, then now obviously is your time. I'll deal with the questions anonymously. I won't name names or anything like that. And then we can finish after that. Just in terms of kind of media relations more broadly, it is really, really powerful, media relations. It's just a great way of getting your firm out there, and a really good way of becoming known as a sort of expert in your field or expert in your region. It's definitely powerful, and if you can combine it with good social media management and other sort of strong marketing tactics, then it will definitely kind of pay for itself in the longer run. Right, I don't have any questions. I don't think of them. Oh, hang on, no, I have got one. What do I do if a journalist ignores my call? Awkward. Okay. Unfortunately, this happens. It happens all the time. You can pitch what you think is the strongest story in the world, and you may well be ignored. I think in that situation, if that happens, I think it's fine to sort of chase once, because we've all had it, haven't we, where we've said something to somebody and you chase and they go, oh my God, I totally missed that. Totally missed that. Yeah, that's great. That's right up the street. Just the one chase there. If you've chased and they're still not coming back to you, either it's not the right story for them, or you're not getting in front of the right person. So just revisit your research in that respect. Really briefly, what about off the record chats? Okay, so this is an interesting one. Personally, not a fan. The reason I'm not a fan is nothing is ever truly legally off the record. And what I mean by that is, if a journalist rings you knowing that you're dealing with a particular matter or a particular transaction, and you say to them, well, I can't talk about it, but off the record, and then you proceed to tell them all about it, what that does is it piques the journalist's interest into knowing, okay, well, there is a story here, and just because this guy can't talk about it doesn't mean that nobody else will. So what you're doing almost is alerting the journalist to the fact that, yeah, absolutely, there is a story. And that enables them to go and think, well, who else can I go and pester? Who can I, how can I dig up on this? Who do I need to speak to actually get to the basis of this story? So I personally don't like an off-the-record chat. I just think they're quite dangerous, and they don't necessarily always give you the result that you want. And also, you know, once the story starts to run, you know, you don't have any control over it. So as a rule, keep your powder dry if you're dealing with something sensitive, or get an expert in, get somebody who's an expert in media relations in, who can manage it for you, so that you can avoid those sorts of those pitfalls and those traps. Excellent. Right, well, that's pretty much me done, I think. These are my contact details. After the event, once the webinar is finished, you'll get a pop-up of a feedback survey. If you could fill that in, that would be absolutely super. I would be forever grateful. It just helps us to make sure that, you know, our webinars are of the quality that we want them to be. I really hope you found that a useful session. If you have any questions about kind of media relations or marketing for law firms generally, do drop me a line. Let's have a chat. I'm always available for you know, a quick chat. You know, regardless of what your needs may be, or if there's anything particular you want to ask about how media relations works. I'm always happy to share my expertise. Quick thank you to Warwickshire Law Society for having me today. Like I say, I hope you found it really useful. And unless there's any questions, which there aren't, I'm going to finish this session now. So thank you. Hope everybody has a good afternoon, and I'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye bye.